So I want to do a little palette blending demo. This is a great way to either expand your color range or also to help you mix or blend out from very difficult colors. So this blue is probably the marker I have that's the hardest to blend out from. Sorry, there's a little color left over on that. So this is a colorless blender, and as you can see, it reactivates it like a smudge, but it doesn't really do much. So I can use my blue marker, apply it to this palette. You can use anything to be your palette that won't absorb water or alcohol. I'm using my colorless blender to pick up a little bit of the color, and then I'm able to go over here and pull out from, I absorbed a lot of color apparently, pull out from pretty straight blue and then create gradients down to almost nothing. You can rework over these, go multiple different directions to smear out the texture of the strokes, but it's pretty effective at getting from one color to another. With chisel tips, it's a little harder, but we're gonna do demos. So I have this light purple blue, I've dipped it and picked up a bunch of the dark blue, and now if I go back and forth, I can do an ombre from one color to the other color. This can be really useful if you want really soft, really fluid ombres or really nice blending in small areas. You can do it with the bullet tips too. It works really well with brush tips. It's not as good with a chisel tip, but you can see it does do a nice job of getting smooth blends without any streakiness. You just have to sort of finesse it in there. And then I usually go back over it with the marker in the opposite direction, the lighter color. So you're always wanting to use a lighter color to pick up a darker color, so that when you're putting in there, it just sort of absorbs it. So now I'm going to demo with the bullet tip how you can sort of get, I picked up a little bit of that pink, now I'm going to pick up a little bit of this purple, create kind of a custom color, but it will also write sort of purple into pink into clear. So you can use this if you, it requires a little bit of planning, but you can use this to mix colors. This one's going to be more of a mixed ombre from kind of a custom color. It's a nice way to use softer, lighter tones. It can be a little bit more painterly. That was my Prismacolor blender. I do not like it nearly as much as this Chameleon blender I'm about to use that has a better brush tip in my opinion. So I'm picking up blues and I can go all the way out to 0 and create really fluid with no extra gradient pens, with no extra colors. I can create really, really soft blends with just a clear blending marker and the ability to pick up a color. So I can create custom colors. This is my clear blending marker. I'm going to pick up green. I'm going to pick up this blue, sort of rolling the marker as I pick up the color on the plate to create this custom blue-green over here. If I switch from one side to the other or only load one side of the marker, I can create so it switches back and forth. But you can see how much more saturated those colors are on their own, but when I mix them together and use the clear marker, I can create like a softer, toned down version of those colors. So it's them swatched right on the side. This is me creating sort of a ombre to 0 with them. It works really well. You can also always add a touch of alcohol to your palette if it starts drying out on you, or if you want it even more toned down, even more clear. So this is a Tombow marker. I just wanted to show you that you can color over using Tombows over your alcohol markers once they're entirely dry, which is very quickly. And the Tombows do a really nice job of just tinting things down. So especially since what you all have is a grayscale set of Tombows, you can use it if you have only really bright alcohol markers. Your grayscale set of Tombows can be a nice way to neutral them and like add depth, add shadows, do a lot of your shading with, and then you can add them on top of your alcohol markers, which is the direction I think I would go with that. They do a lot better going over the alcohol markers than the alcohol markers do going over them, but it's not impossible. And you can see me use alcohol markers on top of this hand as a last step in the previous demo. So these are being pretty saturated. I'm going to show you kind of what happens if I play with some rubbing alcohol here. So picking up with my clear and working it backwards to a really nice fade there. You can just tell this one does it so much better in the Prismacolor blender. But if I want it to go all the way to a deep dark blue, and I'm not wanting it to be as pale, then I can lay it down with that first and then pull out from it, which is another way to make sure you're getting your full range of tones so it stays as dark as possible at that back side. by filling it a little bit with the more times I go over it, the more saturated the paper is getting, the more it's getting full of the alcohol from the blender marker, and the softer blend I'm going to be able to get as I go back over that area. So you can see it goes all the way from the darkest blue, hardest to blend marker I have to a pretty nice little swatch there. You can also always use rubbing alcohol in a paintbrush and markers off your palette if you're wanting something very soft, very painterly, very controlled. And it will still dry super fast. You can get some nice, blends and soft colors with this. I think it's just as easy probably to do it, unless you just need a big area covered, in which case this can be nice for doing stuff with no streaks and backgrounds, stuff like that. But it can be nice if you have a little rubbing alcohol to put it on your palette with the colors you're mixing, and when it picks up, it'll just move so much faster. So I'm filling that area in with the with the blending marker before I go through and start doing this blend out, and it works really well if you pre-fill the area. This is me adding just a little bit of alcohol to it, and you can see that it just sort of makes it super translucent, super soft. You can get really nice watercolors just by adding alcohol to the marker that you're putting on your palette and then picking it up with your blender. So now we're going to take all of this that we just sort of played with and apply it to this little sketch of a chair here. So I'm using my bullet nib here to just really quickly, it's got a plaid on it because I thought that would be good practice for all of us to look at doing kind of a pattern with markers. So I'm laying in the dark lines of the plaid first. It's got a bit of a black charcoal line going through it. And I'm not keeping the line insanely consistent. I'm letting it sort of wander in and out. So I have this bright yellow. It's a little too heavy duty for what I want right now, so I'm laying it down in my palette and only putting it on the page with my blending marker. You'll see I build the whole base of this only using the blending marker as like a paintbrush to pick up these tones. It's still not as messy as paint, and it's still pretty dry on that palette. I could pick it up, I could move it, it's not going to move around, but it reactivates as soon as the marker comes in contact with it. So then I have this sort of pale blue and two different pinks that I'm going to use in the background here to build the plaid. So you can see I'm just getting a lot softer line work than I would if I were applying this straight with that blue. And the blue's pretty saturated. You can see a line swatch of it there. It's a little heavy. This is me applying it directly and with the bullet point, and then I'm going over it and deepening all of those hues with the blending marker dipped in the same blue. Starting to put in my pinks with the blending marker dipped in sort of a dusty pink tone here. And it looks very watercolory. That's the same color if it were applied directly. So you can see that it has a lot more punch when it's applied directly. So now I'm going to go through and bump another layer with my blending marker, putting it on a little heavier to get some of the same saturation tones. Start laying in my shadows with this purple. You can see that as I'm going over things with the blending marker, the dark lines that I put in the beginning, which are really close to black actually, are starting to fade out. So the more you work an area, you can picture that you will start to get rid of the lines underneath it. The more layers you do, the more they sort of blend together. Because if I can make a dark line go away, like in that back corner of the chair, then we can definitely scrub out like a stroke line. But going over it with multiple light layers is really helpful to getting that effect. So here I'm starting to go through and pop with straight to page marker colors. So I'm using the yellow that before we thought was a little too bright. I'm using some pinks and orange and tangerines to help pop where light is hitting this. And adding in some purples into the purpley periwinkle colors into the blue tones. And then going through and blending over them with that gray blue and my blending marker. Going through and brightening all my pinks, upping my saturation, which is the only thing about using the blender marker a lot. You're just not going to get the same amount of saturation, so I like to put a few places in like we are with the real marker straight to the paper so that I kind of know what color tones I'm aiming to hit here. So I'm using the tangerine to give that pink a little bit more of a poppy tone, applying it all with the blending marker. If it's ever a white marker, it's definitely the blending one. It's the only one I have that's white. And you can see there's a nice smooth ombre on the outside of that chair with a nice collection of colors in it on the wrap from behind. I'm going to start playing a little bit with the wood tones, adding cool shadows and a little bit of a hot shadow with this kind of mauve-y color, going over them with a tan and then going over them with a deep sienna brown. And then bumping in shadows with a darker, cooler brown. But all the layers underneath still influence the layers going on top, so it's got kind of a nice sculpted lighting effect. Starting to add more light by adding more heat to my colors, more saturation. Here I'm using the bullet nibs and going directly straight full saturation onto the page. Here I'm using a Tombow, which is one of the water-based ones, in a pale yellow to brighten up some areas and really blend over on top of it. This is Tombow mixing to do shadows on top, so I don't have a great grayscale in this that's cool, or a color for kind of a purpley blue. So I'm using a Tombow black that pulls out to a very purple tone and applying it with the Tombow blender. And the nice thing is, because it's a water-based, it's not going to affect the inks underneath or the colors underneath it at all. It's just going to lay on top of it, so it's not going to reactivate the alcohol layer. Using my white gel pen to pop in a few directional highlights, always going with the grain of what the fabric would be doing with all of my brush strokes, so it helps create that wrapping effect. Shading a little bit of a background on this one too, with a dark cool gray. So you can see a little bit more about how we can get gradients by using the blending marker and just the cool gray on a palette, pulling it up and using, like, allowing there to be texture in it, but getting kind of a nice directional sense of light from it. And then I have a medium cool gray, so going through and bumping some textures, bumping some saturation areas. Doing floorboards with the bullet nib and 2 different grays, so there's some variation. Adding my deep shadows so that the floor looks like it's going away from us. And then finding a warm gray from my Prismacolor set to just cover the whole thing flat, but since it's laying over the shadows, it'll build a nice sense of light still. And then a darker warm gray to build the shadow underneath. So you can see that we did a lot of watercolor blending on this, kind of by using the blending marker dipped into colors. You can see how the Tombow really nicely adds saturation, and hopefully that helps.